They say appearances can be deceiving, and in Cypress Haven, that old saying was about to prove more real than anyone could have imagined. It all began on a quiet Tuesday morning. What looked like a simple mugging attempt on an elderly lunch lady turned into the first domino in a chain reaction that would unravel one of the biggest criminal enterprises in the state's history. The men of the Dark Ravens Motorcycle Club had no idea that the soft-spoken, silver-haired woman they tried to corner outside Cypress Haven Community Bank was Margaret Wilson, an ex-CIA operative with over 20 years of experience in some of the most dangerous covert missions around the globe. By sundown, 3 gang members were behind bars, a corrupt mayor was facing federal charges, and a town that had long been silent found the courage to speak out. But this isn't just a story about a retired spy taking down a few arrogant bikers. This is about how a single moment revealed decades of corruption, united a fractured community, and reshaped how one town stood up to organized crime. Before we dive deeper, where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments. And if you're into stories where the underestimated become unstoppable, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode is one you won't want to miss. So how did it all really begin? That autumn morning started like any other at Pleasant Grove High. Margaret Wilson pulled into her usual parking spot at exactly 6:15 a.m. Her Honda Civic, plain and reliable, gave her a clear view of the cafeteria and main gate. At 68, Margaret moved with the precision and ease of someone half her age. Most people didn't notice the small details, how she always sat facing the door, how her eyes scanned every room, how she could recall the placement of every object. These weren't just quirks. They were instincts, etched into her from years in the field. Tommy Chen was waiting at the cafeteria door, gym bag slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Mrs. Wilson. Early practice today?" "Good morning, Tommy. I've got your protein breakfast ready." She handed him a neatly packed meal. "Big tournament this weekend?" "Yes, ma'am. Coach says I've got a real shot at state." She watched him run off, thinking how his energy stayed strong despite his family's financial struggles. She'd been quietly making sure he was fed properly for months, just one of many silent ways she looked after her students. Principal Hayes caught her on the way to the kitchen. "Mrs. Wilson, got a minute?" "Of course, James. Everything okay?" "I just wanted to thank you for the breakfast program. The school board's seen a bump in test scores. They're asking what we changed." She smiled. "Hungry kids can't learn. It's that simple." Except she knew it wasn't simple at all. Last week she'd overheard 2 men in expensive suits talking to Hayes about investing in school food services. Their posture was all wrong, predatory. Their watches were too flashy. Nothing about them said legitimate business. In the kitchen, Margaret moved through her routine like a machine, every motion efficient, every task executed like clockwork. "Mrs. Wilson, how do you do it?" her young assistant Jenny asked. "You never seem rushed, but everything's ready right on time." "Planning, dear. Life's easier when you know what's coming." And Margaret could feel something was coming. For weeks, the Dark Ravens MC had been getting bolder, expanding into Cypress Haven, shaking down businesses, making their presence known. In just the past month, 3 local shops had shut down after refusing to pay protection money. At 10:30, Margaret left for her regular bank run, depositing the cafeteria's earnings and picking up cash for supplies. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath her shoes as she made the short walk to the bank. Detective Sarah Rodriguez was just walking out when Margaret arrived. Their eyes met briefly. They'd never spoken, but Margaret had noticed Rodriguez's growing frustration with the town's rising crime rate. "Morning," Rodriguez said. "Be careful today," she added. "We've had reports of some shady activity nearby." "Thank you, Detective," Margaret said with a polite nod. "I always am." Inside, she handled her transactions quickly, tucking the withdrawal into her canvas bag. But as she turned to leave, she spotted them, 3 Dark Ravens bikers across the street. Rex, their leader, pretended to be on his phone, eyes fixed on the bank doors. Blade, the enforcer, lingered near an alley. The youngest, Shadow, paced by the bikes, visibly anxious. Margaret let out a quiet sigh. She'd hoped retirement meant peace. But sometimes, life doesn't give you a choice. "Excuse me, Miss Wilson," the bank manager whispered, touching her arm. "Maybe wait inside? We can call someone." "No need, dear," Margaret replied calmly. "Some lessons are best taught in person." And with that, she pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the sunlight, Rex's eyes locking onto her canvas bag, thinking she was just another easy target. He had no idea who he was dealing with. As the three men moved in to intercept her, Margaret quietly sized them up. She noted their positions, read their likely attack patterns, and mentally mapped out 7 different ways to end the encounter before it even started. "Hey, Grandma!" Rex called out with a fake grin, his voice laced with mock concern. "Let us help you with that bag. Streets aren't safe these days." Margaret adjusted her grip on the canvas bag, casually stepping between 2 parked cars and anchoring herself. "Young man," she said evenly, "I'm going to give you one chance to rethink what you're about to do. After that, it gets complicated." Blade laughed, flanking her left. "Listen to Granny, trying to sound tough." "I'm not trying," Margaret replied calmly, "and I'm not just any grandmother." Shadow reached for the bag, and Margaret let out a soft sigh. Some days, old habits just refuse to die. His hand never made contact. In a single, fluid motion, Margaret stepped inside his reach, redirected his momentum, and swept his legs out from under him. Before Shadow could even register what was happening, he was face down on the sidewalk, his arm locked behind his back. "That was your first mistake," she said coolly, applying just enough pressure to keep him there. "Would you like to discuss the others?" Rex's hand twitched toward his jacket, but Margaret's voice stopped him cold. "That would be mistake number 2, she warned. "Drawing a weapon would escalate things, and your concealed carry permit expired 3 months ago, Victor." The use of his real name froze him. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Someone who was hoping for a quiet morning," Margaret answered, and instead found herself dealing with 3 men making impressively bad decisions. Blade began circling left, searching for an opening. Margaret watched him move, his stance, the weight distribution, the tells in his shoulders. "Former Marine?" she asked casually. Rex tensed. "Not special forces, though. Regular infantry, late 90s based on your age." Rex's jaw clenched. "They taught you better than this," Margaret continued. "Your formation? Classic triangle, but sloppy, undisciplined. And you're using military tactics to intimidate civilians? That's a disgrace to the uniform you once wore." By now, a small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, phones out, recording every moment. Detective Rodriguez had quietly doubled back, observing from across the street, already calling in backup. Blade snapped. "Enough of this," he growled, lunging forward with a wild punch. Margaret let Shadow's arm go and sidestepped Blade in one seamless movement, redirecting his momentum into a parking meter with a solid thud. "Military training relies too much on brute force," she said, as if lecturing a class. "There are more efficient ways to end a confrontation." Rex drew a knife, the blade flashing in the autumn light. "Lady, you have no idea what you've stepped into. This isn't just about some cash. This is our town now." "Is it?" Margaret's tone held genuine curiosity. "And who exactly gave you that authority? The mayor? Or someone higher up?" Rex hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. She saw it. There was political protection behind the Dark Raven's racket. Shadow, now back on his feet and clutching his shoulder, muttered, "Boss, something's not right. She's not—" "Shut up!" Rex snapped, but his voice cracked. His confidence was slipping fast. "Take her down, now." What happened next would be replayed thousands of times across social media, but no video would quite capture the fluid grace of Margaret's movements. As both Blade and Shadow charged, Margaret moved between them like water, her strikes exact, her movements effortless. Shadow dropped first, a well-placed pressure strike leaving him gasping for air. Blade's military background made him tougher, but also easier to read. "You're telegraphing your punches," she told him calmly, deflecting his attacks. "And your footwork's all wrong. They should have taught you better at Paris Island." Rex finally pulled his gun, but Margaret was already on him. She closed the gap in a blink, locking her hand around his wrist and pressing the radial nerve. The weapon hit the pavement with a metallic clatter. "That's technically assault with a deadly weapon," came Detective Rodriguez's voice from behind, gun drawn, among other things. "Everyone on the ground," she commanded. "Hands where I can see them!" Sirens howled in the distance as patrol cars arrived. The murmuring crowd stepped back. Margaret calmly picked up her canvas bag, dusted it off, and nodded to the detective. "I believe these gentlemen were just about to reconsider their career paths." As the officers secured the scene, Margaret caught sight of a black SUV parked at the far end of the block, windows tinted, occupants speaking hurriedly into phones. Within minutes, local news vans would flood the area, but that SUV, it would be long gone. "Ma'am, I'm going to need a statement," Rodriguez said, holstering her weapon. Margaret smiled faintly. "Of course, but maybe somewhere with coffee?" The bikers were cuffed and loaded into patrol cars, but Margaret wasn't done just yet. "I have a feeling," she said quietly, "this little scene might lead to some interesting revelations about the recent changes in our town." Rex, now in cuffs, kept his eyes locked on her, and then something clicked. His defiance gave way to recognition. "Wait. I know what you are. You're one of them. But why here? Why would they send someone like you to this town?" "No one sent me," Margaret replied, her voice steady. "I chose this town. I chose these people. And I protect what I choose." Rodriguez's radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice came through tense and urgent. "Detective, the mayor is demanding immediate updates on the bank incident." Rodriguez frowned. That was fast. "Too fast," Margaret murmured, her eyes narrowing. Almost like he knew something was going to happen today. More patrol cars rolled up, followed by Channel 8's Lisa Chen, Cypress Haven's sharpest reporter. The crowd had doubled. Phones were still out, still recording, and Margaret began recognizing faces. Parents, teachers, small business owners, people who'd been quietly suffering under the Dark Raven's grip. "Mrs. Wilson?" It was Tommy Chen. He'd been on his way to grab lunch next door. His eyes were wide, filled with awe. You just... Margaret gave him a warm smile. "Perhaps we should talk about that history essay you were worried about instead." The young wrestler looked back at the cuffed bikers, then at the woman who served him breakfast every morning. "Yes, ma'am, but are you really?" "I'm exactly who I've always been," she said softly. "Someone who protects the people who need it." Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez was already fielding pressure from City Hall. "The mayor's office wants this handled quietly," she muttered under her breath. Margaret glanced at the growing sea of cell phones. "Fat chance of that now." Rex and his crew were being loaded into separate cruisers, but he couldn't stop looking back at Margaret, his glare of rage slowly melting into something else. Fear. The kind that only sets in when you finally understand you picked the wrong target. "You might want to check their phones before anyone wipes them remotely," Margaret suggested to Rodriguez. "I bet you'll find some very interesting connections." Rodriguez paused, studying her. "You know more than you're saying." "I know that 3 months ago the Dark Ravens were nothing but a small-time crew," Margaret said. "Now suddenly they've got high-end lawyers, political protection, and they're snapping up foreclosed properties like candy. That kind of power doesn't grow overnight. It's backed by someone with reach." "Mrs. Wilson?" Rodriguez hesitated, lowering her voice. "Who are you really?" Margaret smiled. "Today, just a lunch lady. One who believes in teaching important lessons, though not the kind you find in textbooks." As if to underscore her words, Shadow groaned from the back of a patrol car, still cradling his numb arm. The crowd was growing by the minute. Margaret spotted Eleanor Thompson, the local diner owner, who had recently been pressured to sell. Eleanor looked on, stunned, but hopeful. "Think they'll talk?" Rodriguez asked, nodding at the patrol cars. "Rex won't," Margaret said. "Military loyalty runs deep, even when it's pointed in the wrong direction. But Shadow? He's young. He's scared. And right now he's realizing he was never untouchable. More news vans arrived. Social media was already exploding with clips titled, "Lunch Lady Takes Down Biker Gang," but Margaret knew the fight was just beginning. "Detective," she said, checking her watch, "I need to get back. Lunch service starts in 40 minutes. Rodriguez blinked. "You're going back to work? After this?" "Of course. The children need to eat," Margaret said with a soft smile, "though I imagine tomorrow's lunch line will come with a few more curious questions." With that, she turned and walked away, her sensible shoes clicking lightly on the pavement. Rodriguez watched her go, eyes narrowed in thought. This wasn't just a botched robbery. Something much bigger had just been set in motion, and the woman at the center of it all had just walked around the corner like nothing happened. "Ma'am," a young officer said, approaching Rodriguez, "the mayor's on his way, in person, and the DA's office is already asking about expedited processing." Rodriguez frowned. "That's not standard protocol." Behind her, Shadow had begun to panic. "You don't understand," he said from the back seat. "We were supposed to be untouchable. They promised us. No one was going to interfere." Rodriguez turned again toward where Margaret had vanished, but the lunch lady was already gone, heading back to her kitchen, as if she hadn't just ignited the first spark of a much bigger fire. The cafeteria doors burst open. Principal Hayes, flushed and visibly rattled, rushed in. "Margaret, the school board's on the phone. The mayor's office keeps calling, and there are reporters in the parking lot." Margaret didn't even flinch. She continued measuring out food with the same practiced calm. "Then perhaps we should start by discussing the irregular donations the board's been receiving," she said evenly. "The ones that just happened to line up with the Dark Raven's sudden expansion in our town." Hayes went pale. "How did you—" "The same way I know about the quiet zoning changes they've been sliding through," she continued. "And the foreclosures that always seem to benefit the same 3 developers." She handed a tray to a wide-eyed student. "Remember to eat your vegetables, Tommy." Across town at the police station, Detective Rodriguez was already knee-deep in the rabbit hole, and it was getting darker by the minute. Shadow had started talking the second they separated him from Rex, and what he revealed raised serious alarms. "They've got people everywhere," he stammered. "City Hall, the courts, even a few cops. They told us no one would touch us if we did what they asked. All we had to do was handle the outreach, make sure the local businesses played along." Rodriguez leaned in. "And by outreach, you mean threats." "Worse," Shadow whispered. "First, the city would randomly find code violations. Then we'd offer our protection. And if they couldn't pay, the businesses went under, sold for cheap, every time." He lowered his voice. "But nobody said anything about someone like her being here." Rodriguez's phone buzzed. Her captain. She let it ring. Right now, she couldn't be sure who was clean. When Mayor Robert Wilson stormed into the station minutes later, he wore a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Detective," he said, all smiles, "I'm sure we can resolve this unfortunate situation internally. No need to escalate." Rodriguez didn't smile back. "With all due respect, mister. Mayor, we're holding 3 suspects on charges of armed robbery, assault, and conspiracy." "Alleged conspiracy," the mayor corrected, still trying to keep his tone smooth. "And as far as I can tell, Mrs. Wilson wasn't harmed. Perhaps this is all just a misunderstanding." "Is that why you got here so fast?" Rodriguez asked bluntly. "To personally handle a misunderstanding?" The mayor's smile tightened like a noose. "Careful, detective. Promotions can be reconsidered." At the Dark Raven's clubhouse, panic had replaced swagger. "She's got to be a plant," one biker snapped. "FBI, CIA, NSA, who cares? She made us look like amateurs." "She made us look weak," the sergeant-at-arms growled. "We have to respond, fast." "You touch her," came a calm voice from the doorway, "and I'll personally make sure your retirement plans include a federal supermax." Heads whipped around. There she was, Margaret Wilson, still in her cafeteria uniform, still wearing her hairnet. "How did you—" "Your security is as sloppy as your judgment," she said. just like your choice in political allies. She placed a thick manila envelope on the table. Inside, you'll find bank statements, property records, and proof that the people backing you, they were always planning to cut you loose. Why show us this? One of them asked, stunned. Because you're soldiers, even if you've forgotten it. And right now, someone's using you to wage war against your own community. Back at school, Tommy Chen was trying to eat lunch, but couldn't escape the growing attention. Did you know, students kept asking, about your lunch lady? Tommy shrugged, then looked up. Know what? That she made sure I never skipped breakfast? That she checked in when things were rough at home? That she believed in me? He straightened his shoulders. Yeah, I knew exactly who she was. Detective Rodriguez was assembling a bigger puzzle now. Shadow's testimony matched up with months of code enforcement records, shell company acquisitions, and real estate deals tied to city officials. It wasn't a gang problem, it was a takeover. Detective, an officer said, handing over a file, we ran the lunch lady's background. Rodriguez opened the folder. Well, it's mostly classified. Let me guess, above my clearance? No, ma'am, the officer said. Above everyone's. Meanwhile, Margaret's phone buzzed, an unlisted number. You were supposed to be retired. This isn't your fight. She typed back, you made it mine the moment you targeted my kids. Outside Pleasant Grove High, Channel 8's Lisa Chen was broadcasting live. Sources suggest this morning's incident may be part of a larger conspiracy involving organized crime and public officials. Social media has already dubbed the mysterious cafeteria worker Meals on Skills, and her takedown video has just crossed 1 million views. In his office, Mayor Wilson was pacing, his phone clutched tight. She has to be neutralized. No, not like that. Do it legally. Find something. Everyone has secrets. Everyone, perhaps, but Margaret Wilson had spent a lifetime mastering the art of keeping them. As she quietly wiped down the kitchen counters after lunch, she allowed herself a small smile. Let them dig. Let them scramble. They didn't understand. Her normal wasn't a disguise. It was a choice she was now ready to reconsider. Principal Hayes reappeared at the door, eyes darting. Margaret, about those donations, She cut him off without even turning. Tomorrow's menu needs an update, she said simply. I think it's time we served some just desserts. Justice, Margaret said softly, sliding the tray into place. It's best served one bite at a time. She checked her watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, she added, removing her apron, there are a few other restaurants in town I need to visit. Seems several owners are suffering from a bit of financial indigestion. As she stepped off the school grounds, she clocked them immediately. 3 unmarked vehicles trying and failing to tail her. Amateurs. But then again, Margaret wasn't hiding. And the Dark Ravens had been right about one thing. This was going to change everything in Cypress Haven. Across town, Detective Rodriguez's phone rang again. This time, it wasn't the mayor. It was the FBI. Detective, the voice said low and urgent, don't trust your usual channels. We've been monitoring Cypress Haven for months. Your lunch lady? She just gave us the opening we've been waiting for. Who is she? Rodriguez asked. There was a pause. Then, someone who chose to serve her country by serving lunch. Until today. Keep her alive, Detective. She's now the most important witness in a case that goes way beyond your jurisdiction. Back at the station, Shadow was unraveling. You don't understand, he whispered, when they find out what I told you. They can't touch you, Rodriguez said, trying to reassure him. Like they couldn't touch Judge Thompson? Shadow shot back. He tried to investigate last year, before his brakes failed. Rodriguez froze. Her blood ran cold. Thompson's death had been ruled an accident, a fluke. But now, as evening fell over Cypress Haven, Margaret walked through town like a ghost people didn't realize they feared until they made way for her. Something was shifting. People could feel it. The only question now was, how deep did the corruption go? And how many names would fall before it ended? But Margaret? She still had fourth period breakfast prep to plan, because strong minds start with full stomachs, especially minds that need to stand up to injustice. At the precinct, Rodriguez stared at Judge Thompson's old case file. A brake failure on a winding mountain road, a routine accident, investigated by officers who now had homes far too nice for their pay grade. Her phone buzzed again. "Detective," said Captain Stevens, his voice full of fake calm. "The mayor's office wants you to release the suspects. Insufficient evidence. Sir, we have witnesses, video footage, a weapon drawn on a civilian. Let them go," he snapped. "Close the case." Rodriguez's jaw clenched. "A civilian?" "Stevens. They pulled a gun on Margaret Wilson." The laugh that came through the line was dry and cold. "You really don't know who Wilson is, do you?" Back at Pleasant Grove High, Margaret worked late into the evening. Not cooking, investigating. The cafeteria had become her war room. Spread across the prep tables were the documents she'd been collecting for months. Property records, financial trails, zoning maps, and court filings. A paper trail that started with petty extortion and led straight into the veins of institutional rot. The kitchen door creaked open. "Late practice?" she asked without looking up. "No," said Tommy Chen. "Dad's diner, they came again. Not bikers this time, suits. Talked about health code violations, said they could make things go away. For a price." Margaret stood still. "And your father?" "He wanted to pay them. We can't afford another inspection." "But I told him about you, about what you did. He wants to talk." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Interesting timing. The mayor's East Side development plan was just fast-tracked, and Tommy's father's diner sat right in the middle of it. At the station, Shadow sat in an interrogation room across from FBI agent Martinez. "Start from the beginning," Martinez said. "How'd the Dark Ravens get in so deep?" "It started 6 months ago," Shadow admitted. "Rex, Victor Canane, he came back from a meeting with some guys in suits. Said we were legit now, had official backing, judges, cops, even the mayor." "Names," Martinez pushed. "I never met them," Shadow said. But Rex always mentioned someone called the commissioner. Said he had everything in his pocket. They picked the targets. We applied pressure. "And Judge Thompson?" Shadow looked sick. "I don't know anything about that." "Don't lie," Martinez warned. "Your phones tell a different story, including deleted texts about brake lines." At the Dark Ravens clubhouse, Rex's absence had triggered chaos. "She made us look weak," one member growled. "You lay a finger on her," the treasurer snapped, "and the feds will have an excuse to tear this town apart." He tossed the manila envelope Margaret had left onto the table. "Look at this. Bank records. Property deals. We're just muscle. Once the developments are done, we're expendable." "Since when do you care about documents?" someone barked. "Since our brothers started dying in accidents." "Just like Thompson. Wake up. We're not players. We're pawns." Margaret's phone buzzed. From Rodriguez-Thompson case reopened. "Watch your back." She typed back, "You too. Check your captain's offshore accounts." At Eleanor Thompson's diner, officially closed, lights burned inside. A quiet resistance was forming. Local business owners had gathered, some still shaking, some still scared, all of them ready to speak. "They threatened my daughter," said the hardware store owner. "Said she'd get expelled over a fake drug charge if I didn't sell." "They sent the health inspector 6 times last month," said a restaurateur. "Each time they offered to buy me out afterward." "They're squeezing the whole East Side," Eleanor said. "My husband, Judge Thompson, he found the proof. Kickbacks, bribes, rigged contracts. The night before he died, he told me he had them." "Why are they moving so fast now?" someone asked. Margaret stepped forward. "Because in 3 days, the city council votes on the East Side Redevelopment Act. If it passes, they'll seize your land through eminent domain. If it fails, investors start asking questions. And people like Judge Thompson, they end up on winding roads with brake lines that don't work." As chaos engulfed City Hall, Margaret Wilson calmly prepared to confront the men threatening Cypress Haven. With Shadow's phone records in FBI hands and the mayor losing control, the truth was ready to surface. At Chen's diner, 3 men in suits pressured Tommy's father until Margaret arrived, her presence disrupting their power. When one reached into his jacket, she stopped him cold. "That would be a mistake," she said, listing every corrupt move they'd made. Outside, police and FBI lights flashed. Detective Rodriguez entered. "The FBI has questions." The suits, suddenly cooperative, were taken into custody. Word spread fast. Across town, business owners began speaking up. The community was stirring. At Pleasant Grove High, Principal Hayes faced a hostile board trying to fire Margaret, but Tommy Chen stepped forward. She didn't just serve food, she served hope. Behind him stood students, parents, teachers, no longer silent. Margaret stood in the back. "Containment failed," she said. "You didn't contain the truth." And when her CIA past was leaked to discredit her, she'd already prepared. She was the one who leaked it. Her full record now proved her experience dismantling corruption worldwide. The commissioner's plans unraveled fast. With every move, he exposed himself more. When he triggered Protocol Zero, a violent strike to crush resistance, Margaret's trap snapped shut. All attacks were anticipated. Every target had been evacuated or fortified. Surveillance captured every crime. His forces walked into an FBI net. Even as the commissioner tried erasing evidence, Margaret revealed she'd designed Protocol Zero years ago for protecting communities, not controlling them. He'd stolen the strategy, but missed the key lesson. Always know what's worth protecting. The school, protected by students, parents, and reformed bikers now called community guardians, withstood the final assault. FBI agents closed in. The commissioner, outmaneuvered at every step, faced global exposure. His last failsafe, a hidden gun, was already in Rex's hands, the former biker leader now working with the FBI. "You thought fear was stronger than community," Margaret said. "You were wrong." As the FBI arrested him, Tommy asked, "What's tomorrow's special?" Margaret smiled. "Fresh starts, with a side of solidarity soup." Because Margaret Wilson hadn't just dismantled corruption, she'd built a community strong enough to keep it from returning.